Hello, beautiful people. This is Freedom Fighter. Thank you for tuning into our channel, Goldilocks Global Banking News. Everybody knows that Goldilocks is the #1 source for the RV GCR. People from around the world tune in to see what Goldilocks is sharing on the RV GCR. Don't miss your chance and get your latest updates every day. So like, share, and subscribe to this channel to get your daily podcast from the Goldilocks articles on the RV GCR. Brought to you by Freedom Fighter.
Hello, beautiful people. This is Freedom Fighter, and welcome to Goldilocks Global Banking News. Folks, I want to remind you to please hit that like button. We want to reach as many people around the world to be in the position that they can establish their relationships not only with wealth managers, but to help them understand the process of the RVGCR so that they are prepared no matter what corner of the globe they are located in. Hit that like button. Hit that like button. We appreciate it because it helps us to have YouTube reach out to more and more people around the world. As these tariffs begin to take form, actually officially on April the 9th, folks, more and more of what we see as a currency war, trade war, will begin to take shape in the global financial system. Let's jump right into what Goldilocks is sharing today. Boom. Now, let me tell you at first, it was on February the 15th, as a reminder, that we did a podcast where Goldilocks provided an article on Trump's reciprocal tariffs and how they will help level the playing field with all currencies around the world. That's right. February the 15th. This is what Goldilocks has been preparing us for over a month. Now, all of a sudden, you see what Goldilocks again. Goldilocks being ahead of everyone else. When are you going to realize, folks, by now? Goldilocks is the actual source of a lot of the intel that's being shared out there. But we'll leave that for another day. Goldilocks is sharing that trade wars can indeed lead to currency revaluations. I'm going to repeat that. Trade, as in trading on the water, as in watch the water, as in the World Trade Organization, because countries trade goods and services amongst each other in the World Trade Organization. And for those countries that are not in the World Trade Organization that do trade with one another, trade, Trade, trade wars can indeed lead to currency revaluations. Though the relationship is complex and depends on various economic factors, political factors. For example, when countries impose tariffs on each other, they create trade barriers that often disrupts the flow of these goods between countries, which can impact exchange rates, folks. Even though the tariffs officially begin on April the 9th, we're already seeing the impact on countries and their currencies. Here's how Goldilocks is sharing. Here's how oftentimes this plays out. Currency pressure from what are called trade imbalances means that if a country raises its tariffs, folks, its imports might drop. reducing demand on their currency and potentially strengthening that currency. On the flip side, if exports from that country decline due to retaliatory tariffs from another country, demands for that country's currency may go down. So, for example, during the U.S.-China trade war in 2018, China's currency, the Chinese yuan, faced depreciating value as tariffs hit China's exports. But what happened? China intervened and stabilized their currency. Many countries can do this. Trade wars create uncertainty, folks, and we're seeing that already with their currencies. And currency markets often react to expectations rather than just immediate outcomes. So think of this uncertainty as if you're like on rough waters, the rough tide. You're on a ship. You're out in the middle of the ocean. And the tide is very, very rough. You have to wait it out for the waters to calm. That's the same as with these reciprocal tariffs. They've created and will continue to create rough waters in the global trade and global currency markets. And we'll have to wait. And we have to wait it out for the rough waters to calm. Governments or central banks might step in to revalue or devalue their currencies deliberately. I'm going to repeat that so you understand. Countries or central banks might step in to revalue or devalue their currencies deliberately. A weaker currency can make exports cheaper and offset tariff costs. See, countries will do this potentially in a deliberate manner to devalue or revalue their currencies in order to offset and make up for the loss from the tariffs. Remember, tariffs are taxes on a country's goods and products that they trade on the water. That being said, Goldilocks is sharing, it's not a straight line from trade war or currency war to boom, revaluation. No. It's not like that. It's never been a flip of the switch. And for that small 1% of the people that we know are grounded in what Goldilocks is sharing, you have a level of peace and understanding that there has never been a flip of the switch. This is a process. However, that peace also comes from you already being prepared by establishing your relationships with the actual bankers who will exchange your currency and manage your wealth. That's why there's a level of anxiety and no peace at all with people who have been convinced to just wait for a notification. See, a trade war, folks, might spark short-term volatility. That's the rough waters, rather than a full-on revaluation. If central banks intervene or if the conflict fizzles out quickly, time will only tell. The outcome, Goldilocks is sharing, hinges on how long the trade war drags on and how markets, the global markets, react. You got to think about it like this also. Still, there is the need for the stable coin regulations in the United States and globally, and other countries around the world which are already ahead of the United States. The digital asset regulations that we await will play a large part in how countries' currencies ultimately level out and move to their new revalued rates. Because the stable coins will stabilize the new values and the new rates on currencies. See, the recent reciprocal tariffs implemented by the United States are beginning to influence currencies around the world. These tariffs announced by President Trump on April the 2nd and set to take effect on April the 9th, they impose a baseline of 10% tariffs on U.S. imports, with additional reciprocal tariffs tailored to specific countries, such as 34% to China, 20% to Europe, 26% on India, and 46% on Vietnam's imports, amongst others. So just think, 10% is a lot. 46% is a lot more. And everything is connected to everything. So as these countries impose tariffs on each other, it's the United States is imposing tariffs on them also. The policy aims to mirror the tariff rates and trade barriers that other countries apply to the U.S. exports, with the stated goal of addressing trade imbalances and boosting domestic industry. Remember, Goldilocks has always said for over 5 years, watch the water, because currencies move through trade on the water. When the U.S. imposes tariffs unilaterally, it reduces demand for imported goods, which in turn decreases the need for foreign currencies to purchase those goods. You see the cause and the effect. The reciprocal tariffs are likely to strengthen the U.S. dollar in the short term due to reduced imported demand, while putting downward pressure on the currencies of trade partners of the United States. The extent of these shifts depends on factors, folks, from each country, like how these countries will react to the tariffs, if there will be retaliation, if the central banks of these countries have a response. So if the central bank of Iraq or the central bank of Vietnam respond a certain way to these tariffs, how our Federal Reserve responds after these countries respond, whether foreign countries intervene in their own foreign currency markets to counteract this depreciation depends on their economic priorities. A sharply depreciating or devaluing currency increases the cost of its imports, such as raw materials, oil, so forth and so on, which could fuel inflation for that country. Countries with high import reliance might intervene to stabilize their own currency. This is what the term, or where the term currency intervention comes from. And the United States warned these countries against currency manipulation, meaning that they won't manipulate their currencies anymore. In the context of reciprocal tariffs, that is. Countries that aggressively devalue their currencies to offset their tariffs risk being labeled manipulators by the United States. And there's a law called the Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act of 2015 that is totally against a country manipulating their currencies based on trade and tariffs. That's only based on trade and tariffs. A 10% swing in the Forex market means that the exchange rate between a currency pair changes by 10% in value. I'm going to repeat that. Listen carefully. If tariffs, a 10% swing in the Forex market means that the exchange rate between a currency pair, whether it's the US dollar paired against whatever currency or whatever currency paired with each other, if there's a 10% change, That means there's a 10% change in the value of that currency. The impact on currency values depends on the direction of the swing, meaning the appreciation or the depreciation, the upward value or the downward value of that currency. Some countries have a higher swing in currency rate changes due to these tariffs. For example, Vietnam's is 46% right now. But it's not where the rate is now, it's where the rate will settle after the effects of these tariffs over time. In time. I know how many of you think, 10%? Okay. It means the value might go up 10%. I'll make, or the value goes up 30%. I'll make. No. No. You have to allow the rough waters to settle. Allow the tide to settle. Remember, we also understand and know because of gold and stable coins, they will help settle the rough tide. Reciprocal tariffs can indeed reflect aspects of supply and demand. For example, if country A slaps a tariff on country B's goods, it reduces the supply of those goods in country A's market. See, this is how tariffs are affected. The swift and the shift in the curves in the tide largely depends on several factors. However, folks, where the dust settles and the tide begins to get smooth, with gold and stable coins, the leveling of the playing field and the calming of the tide will begin to take form. We now just allow the tide to settle over time. It's not going to be instant. That's why it's important. Establish those relationships, because when the tide settles, you want to already have your anchor in the water. The anchor is those relationships with the actual bankers, like many of our members have already done. As Goldilocks always has said, watch the waters. We love you, folks.
Hello, beautiful people. This is Freedom Fighter. Thank you for tuning into our channel, Goldilocks Global Banking News. Everybody knows that Goldilocks is the #1 source for the RV GCR. People from around the world tune in to see what Goldilocks is sharing on the RV GCR. Don't miss your chance and get your latest updates every day. So like, share, and subscribe to this channel to get your daily podcast from the Goldilocks articles on the RV GCR. Brought to you by Freedom Fighter.